Afternoon, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words at BGSU TEDx 2018. I certainly have enjoyed our other speakers today, and I want to thank them for their remarks. So when I thought about this theme, this idea about affinity, I think about Bowling Green State University being a university and the idea of sharing ideas with each other, learning from each other. That certainly fits with the theme of affinity. In my mind, affinity is about coming together as a group, connecting, linking together ideas. And so what a great opportunity I think I have to say a few words about public universities, and specifically Bowling Green State University. But first I want to start with a story. So there was this man who came back from World War II, actually, moved back to the small town that he grew up in. He ended up marrying this woman who happened to be a woman he had met just before he went off to Europe and spent 3.5 years there. They corresponded back and forth, and certainly developed an affinity over those years, but he moved back to that small town. Both of their parents were farmers, by the way, and he came back. He worked in a factory. They got married. Now the wife, the husband, he's in the factory. The wife is working in a hospital. They ended up having 3 children. They saved money. They had a couple different businesses that they created together. The oldest son went off to college, went back, ran the family kind of business that had been started, still doing that. The middle child went and worked in a fairly large corporation, successful career, real involved in kind of her community and up in Wisconsin. And then the youngest, went off to college and recently was named a college president. So that story, I think, demonstrates the power of education, how education changes lives, and specifically public higher education. We often talk about public higher education and the role of public higher education, and it seems to me there's 2 really key components. One is ensuring that we have close connections and affinity and strong learning communities that provide students with an education, graduates, that are relevant and meaningful and they're prepared to go out in the world. And it also is about having relevant and meaningful research that is addressing societal issues, societal challenges that improve the human condition. Now, I do not want to de-emphasize the importance of research and how that can impact moving knowledge forward and solving societal issues. But I just want to put that aside for a second and really focus on this first idea about how do universities, public universities, prepare students for life after college. Now some say, well, it's really all about making sure they're prepared to go out and have a great job, make a lot of money, get a couple extra cars, have a second home, have just a wonderful life. Others say, well, no, education is all about just the educated person, taking classes and being educated. There's no specific outcomes, it's just education for education's sake. Well, I might argue that it's somewhere in between that. And in fact, I would argue that public higher education especially should focus on helping our students have social mobility. Now, social mobility, technically speaking, is the ability to move within or between social classes. But to me, social mobility is much more about empowering our graduates to control their destiny. The opportunity to control your destiny. So your destiny is not defined by the university, by the professors, by your parents, by the environment in which you have grown up or that you are living. You are defining your destiny. the power of social mobility is key, it seems to me, as it comes to education. Now, social mobility over time changes. And so when we think about what is needed today, in today's world for social mobility, it was quite different than in times past. And so before we begin to talk about what are those competencies that one needs to have social mobility in today and going forward, I want to go back and talk a little bit of history. Now, how many historians do we have here? We've got a few, right? So for the historians out here, I apologize in advance. I am taking great liberties. I'm simplifying the world because we don't have a lot of time. So this is going to be quick and dirty, and it isn't, the details will be a little sketchy. But I want to start by talking about the agricultural age. Anybody remember that? So ironically, I was just over in Holmes County, Ohio, and I saw a scene much like this that is still occurring. But in this world, a great part of our country was defined by this type of work, farmers and hunters, and individual work, high level of physical labor. There's some technology there, right? The plow, that's technology. That's an advancement. Certainly the use of a horse to power the plow, additional technology, if you will. But when you think about kind of how work was done, it was a lot of physical. A little bit of technology, and just a little bit of what I would call capital, which are the resources to make this occur. But in general, when you think about it, let's go back there quick, it was a lot to do with the person at the end of the plow. Physical, hard physical labor that produced the food, produced the crops, if you will, that one would move forward with. But as we move past the agricultural age, we started moving into what we call the industrial age. And the industrial age was certainly around the growth of machines, some innovation around how those machines, leveraging physical labor. And so over time, we certainly know the physical part of the labor grew and was less important, but the technology was more important, and it required a fair amount of capital. But at the end, what we know was going on was this idea of balancing physical labor with machines and heavy-duty capital. Now, during this time is when the universities really started growing. If you go back in time, Harvard actually started kind of during the agricultural age in the 1630s or so, first university in the United States. But they were created to train and educate ministers, only ministers. That was their focus. But during this industrial age period, 1861, MIT was founded. And MIT was focusing on the use of technology in society. And in 1862, the Morrill Act, and the Morrill Act was the act signed by President Lincoln at the time that created the land-grant universities across the United States as a way to educate individuals in this era, this industrial era. And the role of the university then became a time when educated individuals were produced, if you will, educated to manage labor, manage the machines. And social mobility in those times were defined by those individuals who knew how to manage, quote unquote, the labor or the machines, if you will. John Dewey and Marie Montessori are two individuals that I think about because Dewey was very much around the philosophy of education. And during that period, the real process of education, he said, should be the process of learning to think through the application of real problems. So in many ways, he criticized how education was almost becoming too technical, and it needed to be more hands-on and doing and dealing with real-world issues. And Maria Montessori, a name that you may recognize because there's a whole philosophy of education that uses her name and her thoughts, but Montessori, Marie Montessori was an Italian physician and teacher, and the great quote I love is, "What the hand does, the mind remembers." And when you really think about how science education developed, the idea of labs and how the hand and the mind work together to create knowledge. But in all of those cases, in the industrial age, it was kind of physical doing, right, in the lab, physically working with machines. Then often we might refer to the information age. There again, a picture that most of you have probably never seen, but at the beginning of the information age, it was still machines are important, but it's information machines. Information machines, not physical machines as much. In this era, social mobility would go to those who had the most knowledge, right? In the ag age, social mobility, the strongest. In the industrial age, the social mobility and how to manage labor and work with machines, physical machines. The information age, mobility around information. Who controls the information had the social mobility. There again, social mobility, the ability to control your destiny. In that information age, actually, universities made great strides. Bowling Green State University, founded in 1910 during the industrial age, was about educating teachers originally. But in 1969, Bowling Green was the first university in the state of Ohio and one of the first in the nation to actually create a department of computer science. And it was quite controversial. There was a fair number of folks who said, no, that's not what universities should be doing. But today, it's a very thriving department, of course. So during that information age, you could imagine, one more time, sorry. Knowledge workers became very important rather than physical. Information was key. And finally, capital. Capital being kind of the resources. But still, the knowledge workers and information were absolutely key. Jerome Bruner, I love Jerome Bruner. If you've not read, his comment was really during that period of time, early information age, like in the 60s, 1960s, he talked about, and here's the quote, "The shrewd guess, the fertile hypothesis, the courageous leap to a tentative conclusion, these are the most valuable coins of the thinker at work." The thinker at work. So, industrial age, learning by doing, absolutely, Dewey, Montessori, but it was physical in nature. Information age, it's about working with information. It's the thinker at work, ideas, thinking, manipulating information. And then finally, Nicholas Negroponte. And Negroponte was the founder of the MIT Media Labs, well-known thinker, futurist about information technology. Recent quote is, "Computing is not about computers anymore. It is about living." It is about living. He was the one that believes that at some point in the future, we will digest knowledge. You want to know physics? Here, take this pill. No, not that one. Take this. This is calculus. That he believes that actually you will ingest knowledge. You won't have to learn it. You will ingest knowledge. Yeah, we know how the brain works, the chemical reactions, and all of those sorts of things. Who knows? But this quote, the idea that computing is not about computers anymore, it is about living. There's something going on here in terms of merger, this whole idea of singularity that you've heard about, how humans and machines become one. And in fact, at some point, some have predicted that machines will dominate humans. Machines will be they don't need us anymore because machines will know more than us. I mean, some have predicted that. Well, I absolutely don't think that's true at all. I think there's this balance. But what I do believe is that we are the beginning of a new age. And I would call that new age the innovation age. And the innovation age the innovation age is all about, it is all about the merger of technology, people, and thinking, the thought, the merger of all these together. My slides are cut off here, but the merger of all of that, the knowledge, technology, people together thinking is kind of the future on this innovation age. And Steve Johnson, so this idea of the innovation age, it's not so much about these separate buckets, it's about all of these things coming together, people, technology, knowledge. Steve Johnson, a great author, has spent a lot of time looking about how innovation has occurred over long periods of time. And where good ideas come from is one of his books. Another book is about the invention of air. There's some great books out there where he talks about where ideas come from, and a couple quotes that are conclusions of his analysis. Ideas rise in crowds, they rise in liquid networks where connection is valued more than protection. So the idea that connections are valued more than protection. Collaboration is as important as competition. And my favorite is chance favors the connected mind. So this idea of the merger of ideas, affinity, learning communities coming together. So what, with that in mind, if in fact you buy this premise that we're entering this innovation age, that we're leaving this information age and moving to the innovation age, what does a university look like that adopts this approach to teaching and learning? So in other words, how do you thrive in this age of innovation? Well, I believe faculty members in the role that each of us play are less about lecturing, like I am right now, and more about guiding, advising. To use a sports metaphor, it's kind of like coaching, right? And it's more about listening and making sure we never lose the curiosity. Because curiosity is what links each of us as humans. And what we can learn from each other will drive us in this innovation age. And never before is it more important to have diverse communities, inclusive communities, because those ideas that we're learning from each other is based upon all of our individual experiences. So the importance of empowering groups to come together to have an affinity around a learning community is absolutely the future. And so one last thing about innovation. Innovation tends to be incremental, right? Over time and throughout history, what we know is, whether it be the invention of flight or a light bulb or whatever it may be, there are so many small innovations that have come along that have created this big idea that we celebrate. But it was all from all these folks coming together. But in today's world going forth, it won't take 70 plus years to invent a light bulb. We have to do it much quicker. So it's got to be much faster, much quicker. We have to embrace and connect learning communities to achieve that innovation. So here are some of the competencies I think one needs to be successful in the innovation age. It's important to have adaptability and risk-taking. It's important that they're connecting and synthesizing. It's important that there's creativity and imagination. It's important that we're balancing collaboration and competition. So risk-taking, adaptability, this idea of connecting and synthesizing from broad-based learning communities, creative imagination, willing to think about things differently, and certainly understanding that it's not all competition, it's collaboration is as important of working together. Because ultimately it is learning to learn. It's the higher level. It's what machines can't do. It's what humans can do. So learning to learn. And so how do universities position students to have social mobility in the age of innovation? I don't know. I really don't. I don't have a specific answer. Because in the age of innovation, it isn't a singular idea. It's not an individual idea. It's a community coming together and creating that together. So I don't know, but what I do know is with the affinity and with the connections with individuals, we can figure that out to drive innovation, to improve the human condition. Here's a couple of things I do know, though. We need to make sure that we pursue a guided, discovery-based approach to learning. So it's taking the best of John Dewey and Marie Montessori and Jerome Bruner and many others, and there's hundreds of other philosophers, educational philosophers. So we've got to think about guided discovery-based learning. And specifically, we need to begin putting students into unstructured and ambiguous situations where they learn to bring structure to the unstructured and create new and innovative solutions. You know, it's no longer good enough to just promote active learning. Today is about tackling real-world and messy problems, trying to seek solutions. Real-world and messy problems. It's about working and learning from diverse colleagues to synthesize solutions to those real-world and messy problems. It's about empowering students to unleash creativity and take learning risks in our learning communities. And it's also about learning to make the world a better place by feeding the public good, which is what public universities should do. And we do that by providing our graduates with the social mobility to thrive in an age of innovation where our students, our graduates, control their destiny. And in my opinion, that's why we're here at Bowling Green State University, and that's what I believe we need to accomplish. I look forward to working with all of us as we create our future. Thank you.